My name is Alara, and if someone had told me 5 years ago that the person I'd fear the most wouldn't be a stranger, a thief, or an enemy but my own stepsister, I would have laughed, maybe even offered them tea, because to me family was sacred. Something you protected and nurtured no matter how different your roots were, but that belief shattered the moment. Serafina entered my life like a beautiful storm, wearing my smile, copying my laugh, and ultimately stealing my entire identity just to become the wife of the man I once loved for one unforgettable night. A man who didn't even remember me but unknowingly changed my entire world with a single night of passion that gave me the two brightest stars of my life, my twin babies Aiden and Arya, who would one day rise like fireflies in darkness to expose the woman who tried to bury me beneath her lies. It all started when my father remarried a wealthy widow with a daughter just a year younger than me. I was 17 and naive. And Serafina, with her delicate features and enchanting voice, quickly became the star of every room. Every gathering, every conversation, even though behind closed doors she barely acknowledged me unless she needed help styling her hair, stealing my clothes, or snatching my diary to laugh with her fake friends. But I tolerated it because my mother had passed away. I didn't want my father to think I couldn't adapt to our new life. Yet deep inside, I always felt a strange chill around Serafina, like she was a mirror not reflecting who I was, but what I feared, a version of me that only existed to please others and manipulate emotions. When I got a scholarship to attend a corporate internship program in the city, I thought it was my chance to step out of her shadow, and during that brief summer, I met Cassian Hale, the rising CEO of Hale Tech. Magnetic, brilliant, and completely out of my league. But fate played a twist when I helped him after his car broke down near the event. Genuine, in a night of shared laughter, clumsy coffee, and a rainy rooftop, we connected in a way that felt like lightning in my chest. I didn't tell him my full name, only Alara, and he didn't ask more, maybe thinking I was one of many interns he'd never see again, but our one-night encounter turned into the memory I clutched for months, especially when I discovered 2 pink lines on a test that made my heart race faster than that summer storm. I kept the pregnancy a secret, knowing no one would understand, not my conservative father, not my vindictive stepsister, not even the man who gave me those babies without knowing it. But I moved to a quiet coastal town, used my savings to rent a modest flat, and worked remotely while raising Aiden and Arya with love lullabies and bedtime stories about brave hearts and honest souls for 4 years. I lived in a bubble of truth and peace, far away from the noise of ambition and betrayal, until one day I saw a magazine cover that made my knees buckle. Cassian Hale, now the country's youngest billionaire CEO, was getting married to Alara Vale, a name I had never given anyone officially, but somehow belonged to the woman standing next to him in a designer gown with my curls. My voice and my signature. The woman was Serafina, and she had done the unthinkable. I stared at the article until tears blurred the words, and I couldn't breathe because somehow my stepsister had stolen my identity, my name, and was marrying the man who didn't even know I existed beyond a fleeting memory, and I didn't know how to tell my babies that the man in their picture book stories was now the husband of the woman I once called sister. The rage I felt wasn't just for the betrayal, but for the fear that Serafina was rewriting my story, erasing my motherhood, and claiming a life that was never hers to begin with. So I did what any mother would do. I packed up my life, held my babies close, and returned to the city with nothing but determination and the truth wrapped in the innocence of my children. I tried to get in touch with Cassian, but security guards outside Heltec treated me like a stalker when I gave my name, saying Mrs. Hale was already inside and had given strict instructions not to entertain imposters. I wanted to scream that I was the real Alara, the one who once saved him in the rain, the one who bore his children, but I realized Serafina had already done her groundwork, weaving lies so thick that even truth struggled to breathe. My twins, just shy of 4, were curious about everything: the city, the tall buildings, the glass doors that wouldn't open unless a badge was scanned, but most of all they were curious about the man whose photo I once tucked in a drawer and now saw on giant billboards as the nation's dream husband. And it was Arya who asked innocently, "Mama, why is that man marrying the bad lady who took your red dress?" And I smiled through tears, because even a child's heart Could sense what mine couldn't deny any longer, I started gathering proof: old internship records, surveillance photos from the night. Cassian's car broke down, a forgotten email from him, asking for my name and number that I never answered out. A fear, but even that wasn't enough to break through the fortress Serafina had built, until one day fate decided to help me in the form of a school charity gala at Helltech, where the CEO and his new wife were expected to sponsor an orphanage program, and children from across the city were invited, so I signed up as a volunteer teacher and brought Aiden and Arya along, dressed in their neatest little outfits, with name tags that read Aiden and Arya Vale. The moment we entered the glass lobby, the receptionist froze and said, "Those kids, they look exactly like Mr. Hale." And though I was rushed away by another staff member who said I wasn't on the guest list, that brief reaction told me something had cracked, a whisper in the walls, that not all was as perfectly staged as Serafina had made it seem. As we stood near the entrance to the gala hall, Arya tugged my sleeve and pointed at the giant portrait above the staircase, Cassian and Serafina holding hands, and whispered, "He looks like my dreams." And before I could stop her, both my children ran toward the dais where Cassian had just begun his speech about love, truth, and future, and in front of an audience of 200, they shouted, "Daddy, you forgot us," and silence fell like thunder in a clear sky. I froze breath, caught legs unwilling to move as Cassian paused, mid-sentence, turned toward the voices, and his eyes landed on two little faces he'd never seen before, yet couldn't deny. Bodies seemed to recognize them even. If his mind couldn't understand why the crowd turned, gasps followed, and Seraphine's expression twisted from poise to panic, her hand gripping his sleeve as if to pull him back from the truth, standing just a few feet away in pigtails and tiny shoes. But it was too late, because the truth didn't need permission. It only needed one moment to be seen, and my babies had given the world that moment. Cassian stepped off the stage, knelt before my children, and whispered something I couldn't hear, but both Aiden and Arya nodded with innocent smiles and pointed back at me, and as his gaze lifted and locked with mine for the first time in years, I saw recognition flash like lightning, pain following close behind, and then a single word escaped his lips: "Ilara," and in that second, the world I had hidden for 4 years began to rise from the shadows into the light. Serafina tried to intervene, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted, and even if I was still trembling, I knew this was just the beginning. The fight for my name, my identity, and my children's future had finally begun, and this time, I wouldn't let silence win. I wouldn't let lies grow. I wouldn't walk away from what was mine, because the truth was alive and walking and talking in the form of 2 tiny souls who carried the face of the man I once loved and the spirit of the woman I used to be before my story was stolen. And no matter what Serafina tried next, no matter how deep she buried her secrets, I knew the moment had come to reclaim not just my name, but the legacy my children deserved, and I would fight with everything I had, not out of revenge, but out of love, because love writes louder than lies, and the truth spoken by children could echo louder than a lifetime of deception. And if that day proved anything, it was that no mask survives the voice of a child who remembers their mother's truth and their father's face. Cassian stood there frozen, his eyes still locked with mine, while his mind struggled to process the tidal wave of emotions that came crashing down in a matter of seconds. The man I once knew as reserved, focused, and rational was visibly trembling as he looked at the 2 children now clinging to his legs with familiarity that defied coincidence. His hand brushed back Arya's curls, the exact shade of his own mother's hair, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something ancient in his eyes. Not suspicion, not doubt, but pure, unfiltered recognition, as though the truth had been waiting for this exact second to leap forward and tear through the layers of carefully curated deception surrounding him. Seraphine's hand gripped his shoulder tighter, her voice cracked as she leaned in and whispered something into his ear, likely some desperate lie, some last attempt to preserve the world she had built out of my stolen pieces. But it was too late, because Cassian gently removed her hand, stepped away from the podium, and walked down the steps holding Aiden and Arya's hands. As the stunned crowd parted like water around them, I stood completely still, my heart racing so fast I thought I might faint, but I refused to collapse. Not now, not when the silence I had endured for 4 years was finally being shattered. Cassian stopped in front of me, his eyes scanning every inch of my face, his voice shaking as he said, "Alara, is it really you?" And all I could do was nod, my voice lost in the lump that had built in my throat, too full of years of stories, tears, lullabies, loneliness, and strength to even form a word in that moment. He looked down at the children again, then back at me and whispered, "They're mine, aren't they?" And this time, I found the strength to say, "Yes, they're yours, and they've always known you, even if you never knew them," because I told them the truth every night in bedtime stories, and every morning when they asked why they didn't have a father present, and the look on his face broke something inside me. A storm of guilt and shock and wonder as he sank to his knees and wrapped his arms around Aiden and Arya, as if anchoring himself to reality with the only things that still made sense. Seraphine's sharp voice sliced through the moment like broken glass as she demanded security to remove me, calling me a fraud, a manipulator, accusing me of trying to destroy her life and embarrass her in front of the board and media. But Cassian rose to his feet and turned to her with a fury I'd never seen in his calm eyes, a controlled inferno that made everyone stop breathing. He demanded an explanation, but Serafina backed away, stuttering, calling me the liar, insisting she was Alara, that I was the one pretending to have history with him. But his voice silenced her completely when he said, "If you're Alara, then who are these children? And why do they have my eyes and her soul? And why do I feel like I've known them all my life?" The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, board members whispering, reporters snapping photos, and PR managers running frantic, trying to control the spiraling scene. Serafina ran out of the hall, her composure shattering in the lies she had built for years, collapsing in the presence of two small voices who simply wanted to know their father. Cassian asked to speak with me privately, and I agreed, though my heart pounded with both hope and dread. We sat in a quiet office, overlooking the skyline. The twins on the couch, drawing in their notebooks, unaware of the storm innocent love had stirred. I told him everything from that night. On the rooftop, to the missed messages, the pregnancy, the fear, the reason I chose silence instead of chaos. And for once, I saw him not as the unreachable CEO or the powerful man on magazine covers, but as the boy in the rain, the one who had shared his fears, his dreams, and his hope for a real connection, not built on status or money, but something true. And raw, he listened without interruption, his hands trembling slightly as he realized the weight of what he had missed for birthdays. Dozens of scraped knees, hundreds of lullabies, and thousands of moments stolen from him by the woman who had wormed her way into his life by impersonating the one who truly knew his soul. When I told him Serafina had used my name, photos, and background to trick him into believing she was me, his face turned ashen, the betrayal cutting deeper than anything else. Because it wasn't just about stolen identity, it was about stolen time, stolen trust, and stolen love. I showed him the proof, the internship records, the archived emails, the photos of that night in the rain, and he didn't need much convincing because in his heart, he already knew, and that realization left him devastated after a long pause. He turned to me and asked, "Why didn't you come sooner? Why did you let me marry her without knowing?" And I looked him in the eyes and said, "Because I didn't want to destroy you. I thought you moved on. I thought you didn't remember me, and I thought if I stayed away, the children would at least have a peaceful life instead of being dragged into the media and drama of your world." And I cried, not because I was weak, but because I had held in the pain for too long, and now it flowed out without restraint. Cassian wiped my tears and promised he would fix everything. He said he didn't care what the media said or what damage control his PR team had to do, because the only thing that mattered now was making it right for the children and for me, he said. He had a right to know them, to love them, and protect them, and he asked if we could start again. From scratch, but from the truth. The twins eventually fell asleep on the couch, and as we watched them breathe softly, Cassian asked if he could hold them one last time before I left. I let him because, despite everything, I knew he was their father in soul and spirit, and that bond was unmistakable. The following day, the news exploded with scandalous headlines. CEO wife exposed as identity. Thief children reveal shocking truth, and suddenly the world that once adored Serafina began to see through the cracks in her charm. She released a statement, denying everything, trying to spin a tale of jealousy and madness. But Cassian held a press conference, standing beside me and our children, announcing the truth. Not as a man covering a scandal, but as a father embracing his family, he told the world. That the real Alara was by his side, that the woman he married had lied her way into his life, and that he would pursue legal action against her for fraud, identity theft, and emotional damage. The public reacted with a mix of sympathy, rage, and fascination. And while the legal proceedings dragged on, Cassian focused on reconnecting with Aiden and Arya, learning their favorite songs, reading them bedtime stories, and showing up for every little moment that mattered. He didn't try to replace the years he missed, but instead tried to make the present so full of love that the past faded a little more each day. As for me, I struggled to adjust to the sudden spotlight, the interviews, the questions, the endless curiosity, but I found strength in knowing I was no longer alone, and that the truth I once feared was now the bridge that reunited a family one afternoon while walking in the park. Arya looked up at me and said, "Mama, why does Daddy look at you like you're the sun?" And I laughed, hugging her tightly, because in that innocent question, I found the answer to everything I had survived. We moved into a modest home together. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to give the twins the life they deserved. Cassian offered me everything. But I told him I didn't need mansions or cars or jewelry. I just needed him to be present and true, and he promised that for the rest of his life he would never again let anyone steal what was meant to be ours. He started attending therapy to deal with the manipulation he endured under Serafin's influence, and slowly began to trust his instincts again. I helped him rebuild not just his heart, but his identity, and he helped me reclaim mine. The twins thrived in their new school, making friends, sharing their drawings, and even writing a story for class titled "The Daddy We Found," which made their teacher cry and me sob into a pillow later that night. There were tough days when reporters showed up at the gate, or when Serafina made one last desperate attempt to twist the narrative, but each time, Cassian stood firm, shielding us with unwavering loyalty and love, and reminding the world that no lie lasts forever, and no truth stays buried forever either. One evening, while tucking the kids into bed, Cassian held both their hands and told them he was sorry for not finding them sooner, and that no matter what, he would always love them, protect them, and be there for every laugh, every tear, and every bedtime story. And in return, Arya handed him a drawing of our family, holding hands under a bright sun, with the words, "Daddy, we love you," written in shaky letters. And in that moment, I knew that no matter how messy our journey had been, we were finally home. The months that followed were a whirlwind of rebuilding, redefining, and rediscovering, as Cassian and I worked not just to heal the broken pieces of our own lives, but to give Aiden and Arya a future rooted in truth, trust, and love. The scandal around Serafina continued to unfold layer by shocking layer, and with every court appearance, every leaked message, and every witness statement, became clear to the public and the law that she had orchestrated an elaborate and cruel scheme for years, impersonating me, forging records, manipulating emotions, and carefully crafting a lie, so perfect that it had deceived even the most intuitive hearts. But in the eyes of justice, perfection is no shield, and her empire of deceit began to crumble like ash in the wind. Cassian's legal team pursued the charges with unwavering precision, and while I remained mostly behind the scenes, attending only essential hearings and avoiding cameras, I was there for the most important day, when Serafina finally stood before the judge, stripped of her elegance, her calm and her power, her voice quivering as she tried to explain her reasons, how she always felt invisible, how she only wanted to be loved, how she had watched from the shadows as everyone admired me instead of her. And I realized then that Serafina had never wanted Cassian or his wealth or his empire as much as she had wanted to be me, to live a life that wasn't hers, to wear a skin that never fit her soul. But the court wasn't there for psychological healing, it was there for truth and accountability, and the verdict was swift and brutal. She was found guilty of identity theft, forgery, emotional and financial fraud, and sentenced not only to serve time, but to pay restitution, including damages to Cassian. And to me, the moment the gavel hit the bench, I felt a strange weight lift from my chest. Not triumph, not vengeance, just peace. A quiet, steady breath of relief that whispered, "It's over, and now you can begin again." Cassian wrapped his arms around me outside the courthouse, the children sandwiched between us, And as the cameras flashed and reporters shouted their questions, we ignored them all, focusing only on the tiny hands that clutched our fingers and the shared heartbeat between us that pulsed with resilience and forgiveness and fierce devotion. We took a trip after that, not a glamorous retreat or luxury escape, but a road trip across the countryside, stopping at small farms and quiet lakes picking strawberries, by hand watching fireflies, and sleeping under patchwork quilts in cottages that smelled of old wood and new hope. The children laughed more freely in those days, their eyes brighter, their smiles fuller, and Cassie and I rediscovered the version of each other we'd only met briefly years ago. Stripped of suits and titles and guarded walls, we talked late into the night, sometimes in whispers, sometimes through tears, and sometimes in a comfortable silence that said everything words could not say. One evening, while the twins were asleep beside a crackling fireplace, he took my hand and told me he loved me not with the urgency of lust or the desperation of guilt, but with the calm strength of someone who had found his anchor in a storm. And I told him I loved him too, not because he was the father of my children or because he had chosen me over lies, but because in every small moment he showed up with consistency, tenderness, and truth. We returned home and decided to start fresh together, not in the shadow of his mansion or under the pressure of his corporate world, but in a home. We chose together a warm, sunlit house near the edge of the city, where the kids could run wild in the backyard, and where every room echoed with laughter, music, and the smell of something always cooking. Cassian adjusted his work life, carving out time to be present, attending parent-teacher meetings, dance recitals, and school science fairs, and slowly the community stopped seeing him as just the CEO in the scandal, but as the father who never missed a bedtime, the husband who helped with grocery shopping, and the man who once believed in love enough to search for it again. From the ashes of betrayal, he started initiatives for single parents, launched scholarships for women returning to education, and partnered with organizations that supported victims of identity theft, not as a PR move, but as a way to give meaning to what we had survived. And every time he stood on stage or behind a mic, he always mentioned the two little voices who changed his life and the woman who raised them with unwavering courage. The twins thrived under the attention and affection, growing into thoughtful, kind, curious souls. Aiden with his obsession for space and stars, and Arya with her love for animals and art. And every night, as we tucked them in, they would ask for stories, not of princesses or dragons, but of us, of how we met, of what it meant to be brave, of why truth was important. And we told them again and again, so that they would never forget that their family was built, not on perfection, but on honesty and love. One rainy Saturday, we found an old journal in a box Cassian had stored from years ago. It was the one he used during the internship summer, the one I had written in on that rainy rooftop and forgotten. And as we flipped through the pages, we found scribbled notes of that night, moments he had written down because he couldn't forget them either, like how I made a joke about the rain tasting like burnt toast, or how he watched me dancing in a puddle and thought, this girl is going to change me. And I cried again because even when he didn't know, he had always carried a piece of me in him, and he held me and whispered, you never left, I just didn't know how to find you fast enough. Seasons changed, birthdays came and went, and with each passing year, the shadows of the past faded a little more, replaced by new memories, ones we created with intention and joy. Arya lost her first tooth during a pancake breakfast and insisted the tooth fairy had blue wings and a pink briefcase. Aiden built a rocket ship from cardboard that nearly took down half the living room but made us all laugh until our sides hurt. We took them to the beach where they wrote their names in the sand and built castles that we swore we'd preserve forever. And Cassian carved our initials into a tree near the cliffs, saying now we're permanent, not because of pain, but because of purpose. We also faced challenges, nights when the twins asked hard questions about Serafina and why she did what she did, or moments when Cassian blamed himself for not seeing through the lies sooner, and I reminded him healing was not linear, that some days would hurt and some days would heal, but all of them would be worth it because we were doing it together. We went to counseling not just as a couple, but as a family, learning how to communicate without fear, how to support without smothering, and how to forgive without forgetting. We grew not just in love, but in understanding. and Cassian began writing again, something he hadn't done since college: poems, letters, thoughts, scribbled in notebooks. And one day he handed me a binder titled For Alara, and inside it all, and it was a collection of memories. Dreams, fears, and moments about me and the kids, about the guilt, the love, the awe, and the gratitude. And he read one to me one night under the stars about how he once thought he lost the best thing that ever happened to him, only to realize she had been waiting not in anger, but in quiet strength, and kissed him with tears in my eyes, because I knew then that we had truly made it through, not to the end, but to a new beginning. The board at Heltech restructured, offering Cassian a more flexible role, and while he still led the company, he chose to mentor young entrepreneurs, focusing on innovation, ethics, and human value. And he often brought Aiden to the office, letting him play with gadgets and teaching him about coding, while Arya turned the break room into an art gallery with her drawings taped across the walls. The staff adored them and joked that the future CEO and chief creative officer were already in training, and I watched them, knowing that they were growing in a world where love triumphed over lies, where identity wasn't what you wore, but who you were when no one was looking, and where family wasn't defined by tradition, but by truth. One evening, years later, as we celebrated the twins' 9th birthday in our backyard, surrounded by fairy lights, laughter, and the smell of cinnamon cupcakes, Cassian stood beside me, holding my hand, and asked if I remembered the night. It all changed, and I nodded, thinking of that gala, that cry of, "Daddy, you forgot us," and how it cracked the illusion open. And he said, "They didn't just expose her, Alara, they saved me too." And I whispered, "They saved all of us." And in that moment, the kids ran toward us with a new drawing. This one with all 4 of us standing under a sky of stars, and above it the words, "We are whole." And I framed it and hung it in the living room right above the fireplace, so that every day, no matter how busy or chaotic or ordinary, we remembered that truth doesn't whisper, it roars in the voices of the innocent, in the courage of a mother, and in the redemption of a man who learned to love again, not in perfection, but in presence. And we lived not a fairy tale, but something far more beautiful, a life that was real, raw, and ours completely and unapologetically ours.